Hi, Christian. Welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, James. Thanks very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, likewise. I'm excited for this conversation because you've got, quite an interesting background, backstory, and journey into what you're doing now. So, let's start there. So, all the way back to having transitioned from an aspiring NYPD officer
Well, it's
to a
definitely a good
founder.
start to a story. Yeah. I better add a bit more. I better add a bit more context to that. And actually, I think it has a bearing on where I am today and some of the values and some of the places where I've been to and come from. So let me go back if it's okay to my school days just to kind of start all this
Of
off.
course.
Because people will probably be wondering, was that right? Did he say NYPD? I remember watching. Do you remember the movie Speed? Keanu Reeves. I remember watching that
I
with a
do.
friend of mine, David Kennedy, and it was towards the end of kind of the schooling time, and we had some officers in, and they were talking about different things, and then we had a school counselor in, and I remember thinking, I don't know what I want to do with my life, and talking to David just before I went in to meet this school counselor, they basically said, they're going to ask you when you finish school, what do you fancy doing? So I said, okay, do you know what? I'm going to say I want to be like that. We just watched the movie. He said, yeah, go and do it. So I went in and thought I'd just get a bit of a laugh and so on. And, Christian, come on now, be serious. I switched it and he just went to me, so what do you want to do? I want to join the FBI. He went, okay, fine. And I thought, where's the joke? Where's the feedback on this? And he kind of said to me, okay, have you looked about what you need to do to get into the FBI then? And I went, no. He says, okay, let's do it together. Turned around and away he went. And he said, okay, well, look, bad news is you have to be a citizen. I said, there you go, that's it. He said, yeah, but the door's not closed yet. You can go in through a lot of the police departments and so on and go through that way. And I was like, okay, so here's a couple, print out. There you go. If that's what you want to do, go in and let's see each other next week. And I went, oh God. I came out, I remember turned Dave and kind of gone, what do you say? And I went, I've got to call these numbers. And he went, so I think his idea of whatever I was, I don't know what he wanted to say, suddenly changed, and he went in and told him I wanted to be a painter or something. Last minute. So look, the reason for that short intro and that kind of story was, it pushed me back into thinking about actually anything was possible, regardless of where you are in that kind of journey and your dreams, etc. And that's what it was as a kid, right? So, but I did find my way all the way into a guy called Michael Markman's office, who was the chief of personnel for the NYPD and what was the Twin Towers there at the time, and met the director of the FBI, and then was Kathleen Coletti was the sergeant who in charge of me when I went over, which was January 1999. God, seems like such a long time ago now. And did I remember going down and doing my exams in John Stewart School in Chinatown, etc. But that gave me a good standing in terms of where I was today. Came back home, and of course, many things happened then from coming back home just due to visa issues, etc. But of course, that set me on a bit of a journey then in terms of if there was something I wanted to do, if it's it seems unobtainable, break it down and see actually where you need to go to get to where you need to be.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I love that little backstory and that nugget because it's absolutely true. And it's actually really funny, that story, because I remember, when I was a child and watching these sort of American cop TV shows, I remember I wanted to do the same, but, I didn't pursue it as persistently as you did with
I do remember, just not to harp on about it, I remember my phone ringing back in the day, and obviously those, analog phones, you kind of down, and my mum going on the phone and said, who is this? And it was, could you say it again? I said, yes. And she looked and goes, I'm sorry, you're from, okay. And that was it. And they shout up to my room and said, Christian, there's someone on from the mayor's office in New York, which I think was Rudolph Giuliani at the time, but it was one of his aides saying, hi, we've got all your letters, which is how I kind of bombarded them and so on. We are going to send you out some of these packs, kind of, please don't write or do anything else anymore. We've got your stuff. We're sending it to you. Someone from the NYPD is going to be in touch, So yeah, it was definitely persistence, and that's drove me ever since, I think,
Mm. Yeah, nice. And then what actually sparked the inspiration or move into entrepreneurship, along that journey?
Do you know what? Going back to that original story, I think going in not knowing what I want to do, like everyone, there's so many people still unsure what they want to do. So your natural progression is into university. For some, others into apprenticeships. Some just know what they want to do. They have a passion and a love for something. Um, I had a passion and a love for a lot of things, but just wasn't too sure what to do. And back, I suppose then that late '90s, the aspiring ideas of kind of entrepreneurship only went as far as a trade. That was probably about it. There was no kind of what you look at these days in terms of um, influencers, different things, setting up your own business. And we still have a lack of that today, I suppose, in education in terms of understanding business in schools today. But that was the first pivot, James, I think. And that was the bit where I kind of thought about, if I can do this, I can do something else. So that natural journey, then I came over to the UK, skipping a few things. I was offered a role here within loss prevention, one of the banks. Um, and this kind of pivoted from where I was at NYPD, came home, started doing some other kind of stuff in law enforcement, and then into this. Um, and at each time, I remember kind of having an idea, no matter whether it was over the last kind of 4 or 5, employers or so on. And every time I'd go and I'd say, hey, by the way, have we thought about doing this or changing this? There was always something or someone in the big corporate world would say, no, hold on, just do this work. This is how we do it. This is how it's always been done. So there's always something in me that kind of wanted to make that kind of change and kind of do something a bit different, I suppose, for myself, or look at things a little bit differently. And I suppose the biggest example I have is one of the jobs I was leaving. I was thinking I just want to do something different, and I walked into a Manpower on Wine Street in Bristol, and just so happens on the one day, maybe Faith and so on, the managing director in there was this lady. I can't recall her name, and they were rebranding. So Manpower nationally were rebranding as this huge kind of high street recruitment agency. And of course, the press were in there, and I didn't know. I just walked straight in. I was looking for a new job, and she decided I'll just take this one. Showing obviously to cameras and so on there, and said, "Hi, how are you?" Introduced herself. Margaret, I think her name was. Anyway, so I said, "Hello, Christian Chana. What do you do, Christian?" I said, "Well, I'm dealing in loss prevention. I'm looking for something very, very similar within that field." And she went, "Oh, yeah, we don't do anything like that." I said, "I've been to a couple of agencies today." I said, "No one seems to do this, or this niche, let's say." And I kind of cornered her a little bit. I said, "Why?" And she kind of looked at me and kind of, pressed in the background and everything. And she went, it's a really good question. She said, maybe we can have a look and see if we can do something for you. If you don't mind taking a seat over here, and I'll be back to you in a moment. Where I'm probably previously with a business manager consultant, I would have been, nope, sorry, thanks very much, and put out the door. So anyway, everyone went. True to her word, she came over, sat down, and she said, okay, what exactly is it you're looking for? What to do? And I explained it. And she said, well, don't really do that. And again, I kind of pushed and said, well, why? Let's look at it and said, let's do this niche and kind of, do you know how many people are working in this industry with me? There's X, there's kind of this. Look at all the banks that need it and so on. She went, have you ever thought about being a recruitment consultant? I said, no, not for me. Don't like sales. It's not my kind of thing. And she said, I would disagree. And I said, okay, well, it probably doesn't pay very well. She said, actually, can pay quite well. So after a while, she asked me to go away and think about it again, very much like the first part of my life. And I came back and decided, do you know what? I'll give it a go. And that leads me into the next bit of learning that I had, I think, more than anything, James. And that was that I had no intention of doing sales. Didn't like it. It wasn't something I wanted to do. It always shone away from it. And during my transition with Manpower, I always remember one of my colleagues didn't work in the same branch as me, but he was at the same level as I was. Lawrence Kirk was his name. Um, and is the VP now globally of one of the large RPOs. And he started as a consultant as well, worked his way up to business manager. We're always vying with each other, and kind of then on to regional manager, director, and so on. And I ended up being one of the quickest promoted in that line with Manpower over those years. And I remember kind of thinking to myself as consultants were coming in, kind of sitting down and leaving. The first little bit of advice was you can't teach sales. You can teach sales techniques, but what came from the sales was certainly let's say personality. And it was personality was key. And some of those metrics that we were dealing with on actually hiring consultants ourselves, let alone the people then we're putting into jobs, sometimes weren't always correct. You're looking for, a couple of bullet points. Do they have this? Yes, they must be right. And actually the personality and how the industry has moved is trying to find that right fit. When you look at it, that cultural fit and how that's come in over the last kind of 10 years. Previous to that, we didn't hear very much about this cultural fit. Can they do the job? Yeah, okay, there you go, offer them, etc. And certainly that was something that stuck with me again in doing that. And I think, throughout my time there, kind of, I looked at kind of merging two branches into one, kind of looking at different niches again and what we could do. And that was one of the biggest kind of hitters in terms of that entrepreneurial bit altogether.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Really interesting backstory into getting into almost being pushed into sales, and that personality piece of sales. I truly believe that as well. You're selling a transference of emotion and that energy, as well as everything else being the
Absolutely.
right fit. Yeah, yeah. And then so interesting. And then up until that point, and then so what were the initial experiences that shaped the foundation of now, Bristol Payji
Yeah,
and
yeah.
everything that you've got going on?
I think so. So my natural transition then was where do I go after what I had done? So I went off and started doing something, hence that entrepreneurship for myself. I looked at different niches. It was actuarial at the time, which is the mechanics and financial securities kind of, in I suppose that real niche market that, what people didn't know what an actuary was kind of 10 years ago. And kind of, I'd said, look, carve this little area into myself, went off, did it for myself. Then I started doing it for other headhunting businesses and strategy businesses and so on. One thing led to another. Went to one company, set up a few places for them globally. Then I was on honeymoon. Got a call from James Caan, and I think it was his daughter, and just kind of said, "Hey, yeah, Christian, yeah, absolutely. What can I do for you?" And James has seen what you've done, etc. We'd like to call you in. Would you like to kind of come in, and kind of look at a business with us? Yeah, absolutely. Sounds great. I'm trying to tell my wife then when I come off the phone. You never guess who was on the phone to me. Um, anyway, through probably about 9 different meetings, I think altogether, eventually I think I accepted and went in and started working within the Hamilton Bradshaw kind of domain. And there was many of us went in and out of that kind of revolving door, let's say, but became CEO of a couple of different businesses in there. Um, and obviously built them up. And I think as I was doing that, that naturally came to an end. There was a sale of the business. How the branch was sold off. Went down, started doing it for other investors, and then thought to myself, I need to go back and start doing a lot of this for myself a little bit. So we got to, where are we now? Up to about 2018. And I thought to myself, do you know what? I want to really give back a little bit. I had a bit of money and capital, and kind of thought, what do I do here? So 2016, we had the introductory of GDPR, which wasn't really coming into force until 2018, but people didn't really know what it was. That general data regulation kind of, and kind of what are we doing with this, and kind of who's holding whose information and data, etc. So I thought to myself, well, let's build a talent management system, but let's do it for the hospitality industry. GDP is quite high, turnover is low. It's a perfect industry to go into. And then COVID hit.
Mm.
There's no one hiring, and there's certainly no one in hospitality. And it was one of those moments of kind of, you'd put so much money and effort into it. The whole platform was built. We had got a first couple of customers on, big hotels, not just here in UK, but in Ireland as well, my home place. And I kind of thought to myself, God, that's it, isn't it? And kind of, what am I going to do? And then furloughing people, should we do that? And I thought, no, just let's hold on for a minute. And then that was the next phase of that whiteboard kind of, and moment, kind of putting things up, what to do next in that light bulb moment. Because I remember with a partner of mine looking at things, thinking, what do we do? Couldn't come up with anything. And then we started talking about, if you remember, did you get a slot in Sainsbury's or Tesco's or Asda? Seems ages ago now, but obviously that's what you had to do. You had to go in and get a slot to kind of go in and shop at the time. And we said no. And then thought, well, actually, we've got everything on our doorstep here in terms of community. So we've got, butchers, the fruit and veg shop, the kind of, wine, cheese, you name it. But actually no one's doing anything. They all had Facebook pages, or they had kind of call us and we'll try and get a delivery out to you. And, the phone was always busy. So I eventually made sure I got in contact with everyone on my local high street, which is BS3 here, Bedminster, if anyone knows it, in Bristol, and said to them, look, I'm going to build a platform. I'm going to get my guys, I'm going to pay for it, we're going to build a platform. And through there, what we're going to do is we're going to give you access so you can showcase your products and services to the local area. So if you live in BS3 and people put in BS3 in their postcode and so on, their address, you're going to be able to deliver. And if you remember at that time, what we, people were able to do a delivery or kind of a pickup and so on, click and collect. And so we built this. And I think in the first 10 weeks, about 25 grand's worth of orders went through. It was great. And I think that was one of those, moments. I think James were kind of thinking, actually, what we've done now is we've looked at in the same way as any entrepreneurial bit, we've looked at a problem. And actually, this is a very simple solution, but no one was really doing it. Now you see your Shopify's and Etsy's and so on of the world. And, they've really shone and grown from there. But I think that was another pivotal moment before we went into the Bristol Payji side of things, and that kind of FinTech sphere, which was, again, very different to what we were doing right back then.
Really interesting. And yeah, the local community, in times of, craziness, chaos, trouble, local community is always a powerful message. People do get together, group together, and really try and help each other. So you almost instigated and led a path to enable people to do that as well. That was, obviously of commercial benefit too, so to drive movement in the economy and all that. So yeah, really, really interesting, powerful story. That what's been a significant learning as you bridge the gap then between recruitment and FinTech, moving into FinTech now?
I think from the journey that we've discussed, or the narrative that I was kind of trying to portray there, James, I think what suddenly happened was we realized during that COVID period that what we were trying to do, recruitment, was great, and there was going to be another kind of area for that. But when we went in and saw how the market was shaping day to day in our lives and what we were doing, we kind of thought, actually, there's a bit more of a gap here. There's certain bits of the market we could really tap into. And I kind of thought to myself, I don't know very much about the hospitality industry or e-commerce industry and so on. And we saw where a lot of the trends were going. So towards the end of COVID, when the Shopify's, I was saying, were really, really taking off, and we had this very small kind of localized e-commerce thing, I thought, we're going to have to put a lot of money into this. But before we do, we need to do some market analysis, not just of obviously growing that, but actually trying to think about what is it that people need. So we sent out big research kind of, questions and answers. And what we got back was a little bit more surprising. So we had to kind of find, really delve in a bit deeper. And what I meant by surprising was one of the key elements of the questions that we had were, what were your transaction costs and who are you dealing with? And people didn't know, or if they tried to have a stab at kind of what they were paying, it didn't look right in terms of when you were looking at websites and so on, and they hadn't kind of really brought in or factored in chargebacks and returns and refunds, etc. We found it quite high. We're looking at it thinking, why is the industry for transactions quite high? And why are they saying about reconciliation? Surely it's a kind of, you pay, you get money on the same day. And it went into an area where, of discovery more than anything else. So I really wanted to delve into this and kind of thought, well, I'm not from the FinTech industry, but kind of I really want to understand this. And what we'd had, the nearest thing we had was in 2012, Bristol here launched the Bristol Pound. And it became very Marmite. It was a huge adopter in terms of businesses and people and loving it and wanting it. But of course, it was spend local money in the local area. But it was hard currency. And it was hard currency, and I don't know where to spend it or what shop's taking it unless they have a sticker on the window, during a time when the digital era of banking was starting to come through from kind of 2015 onwards. So it was always with cash going down like that and that digital era of banking coming up like this. There was only, a certain ending to it. But the premise to what they were trying to do in terms of, buy local, spend local, keep the money locally in your own economy, really, really shone true. And I'll go into that in a bit more in detail. But what we decided to do is have a look really at these transactions and understand it a lot more. So we reached out to kind of, people in MasterCard and so on, and kind of said, look, please educate me. Just give me a quick kind of once over. Because when we ask people, they'll go, I don't really know. I'm not quite too sure. It just lands in my bank. Or kind of what happens when something on your bank account says pending. And you go, it just means it's going to come, but it's there. They have transferred it. When's it going to arrive? I don't know. And I couldn't get my head around the fact that if the two of us go for a drink, James, and after kind of, couple pints, I'll say, look, I'm going to transfer you some money. Thanks very much. You bought some food as well. Say, yeah, fine. And if I was transferring you 50 quid, I'll just say, here's your bank details. Yeah, put that into my phone, click. And you go, yeah, got it. Thanks very much. And then that's it. But when we're dealing with businesses, it's a lot different. If I go to pay and get out my card or double tap my Apple Pay to pay the businesses, the first thing is, unknown to a lot of people, is the businesses don't get that money, certainly not straight away. And it can take 3 to 5 days for it to land in that business's bank account. The second part of that is it goes on what we call a little round the world trip, where it stops off at various large corporations along the way, and they all get stuff for, processing, authorization, permissions, etc. And it's all these little fancy words. And essentially, it's bundled together. It's called acquiring. And acquiring is where everyone, these little middlemen, take their little bits and so on, a few pence here, a few pence here, a few pence here, till eventually it does land in the merchant's account. Well, let's say that 50 quid is no longer 50 quid. It's let's say £48, right? And you kind of think, where's my £2 gone? Oh, well, that's for us. We need to look after things, fraud, etc. We need to make sure everything is safe. But interestingly, when you think about being safe, putting your details into the open market on the internet kind of is increasing fraud. When we look at the data around kind of when we had kind of, tap with your card and it was 30 quid, now it's 100 quid, fraud has gone up again. And you kind of look at this and you're delving into a lot of this data and how the world is working through these kinds of transactions. And you're thinking, this is not right. Something's wrong here, And then you start to look online. You think, oh, well, someone has the answer, peer to peer, or you look at something like that, money from one account straight to the other. And then you think, well, actually, yeah, but it's still, those banks are still have charges and so on. And somewhere within this, the money is still being, settled in different accounts, and these acquiring pieces are still being met. So how do you deal with that? And one of the things we looked at again was going back to what the Bristol pound was there and why it was there, and what was the precedent behind it, and what was the story. And one of the best examples I can give was when researching, there was something called the LM3 model. The LM3 model was essentially that says that for every £1 you spend locally, it's equal to £1.73. And you think, okay, how did I work that out? That doesn't sound quite right. That someone's made up that. It's one of those stats and so on. But and I won't try and justify it, but I will give an example to how you quantify a lot of this. If you have £50, going back to where we were, and you spend it in shop A, and that first shop says, thanks very much for your 50 quid. Now they go in, they take their 50 quid that they've just gotten from you, and they go into shop B or the second shop and so on, and they spend that £50 again. And you do this, let's say 50 times. What happens at the very end is when they get to shop 50 is that £50 is still £50, right? So it's still there, it's still worth 50 quid, and it's being handed in. Now let's reverse that. You go back to shop 1 and I get out Apple Pay, Google Pay, or my card, and I tap. Remember those pence that we talked about? It's 48 quid. Now let's do that 50 times or 30 times or whatever many ones we have. And you end up with like £5 by the time you get to the end, right? Because obviously it's coming off every single time. And that's the best example, I suppose, in terms of how I learned to understand this and the markets. And I thought, well, why does there need to be acquiring? And essentially, there doesn't, right? So if we come up with, and this is where we created, obviously, Payji and Bristol Pay, is kind of look at it and think, well, what if we have an e-wallet environment But instead of that, it needs to be a bit better in terms of that USP. So rather than just having something peer to peer where you put money in, you don't earn interest and so on. If you want to earn interest, you kind of go to the banks, etc. But if I said to you, tell me how much interest you've earned from your bank this year, no, I think I paid more in fees, right? No one remembers this thing because we haven't huge sums of money just in terms of local community and so on, and the average wage. And so we thought, well, we get rid of all these little bits. What we're left with is a really good community kind of, payment system where what we can do is we can still charge the businesses themselves rather than charging people one to one. So you don't charge for that, but the businesses themselves, we could charge them, let's say 1%. And this is just an example. What we can do with that 1% is put 25% of that 1% of that transaction fee into, let's say, a city pot. So let's say that becomes the Bristol city pot, right? Now, in that pot, that builds up and builds up and builds up to essentially you have that wad of cash, and that then can be then reinvested back into the local communities as part of a positive social impact. Now, there's many different layers to that, of course, in terms of how do you do that, what's, kind of in terms of those percentages, how it's split up, etc., which I'll go into. But that was the real premise into building and how we've got to where we are in a fintech world. And I have to say this, that, I didn't come from this fintech background previously. As we're talking this journey and so on, I was literally someone that's come along and said, I can see a problem. Here's a solution, looked into it, and actually becomes simplistic. It doesn't need to be, moving from where we are now to kind of a Web3, blockchain, etc., which of course we will do, and dealing with AI. I think too many people are just jumping straight into kind of what's trending right now. Repackaging something doesn't make it streamlined. Kind of putting something into AI and so on doesn't mean suddenly it's fintech. You kind of have to look at actually what is those grassroots problems. What problem are you solving, and how are you solving it in a simple way that actually you can get enough customer adoption and people will look at it and think this resonates with me, and absolutely this is what I need to go with. So that's where we were.
Yeah, again, really fascinating story, and yeah, the part that you just mentioned then, which is obviously a repeating theme. This has become almost a principle that you know will do business on or ideate on, is that finding the problem and then finding the simple solution and simplifying it, rather than it's this human condition that we do jump on shiny objects, but also we overcomplicate things that don't necessarily have to be. And if there's simple solutions there and you're always looking for them and you have that decision making principle that you seem to have, then they'll present themselves.
Absolutely. And look, there's many things that we've had to do in the background as well. If someone was listening to this and said, is that it? Is that what they've done? It's great. They've come up with a solution. Actually, they have a little bit of a USP, and that sounds good. But and they sit back and think, I'm not too sure it will work where I live. And why would it work? And what's the customer adoption? And this is something that we've really had to work hard on. And they'd be right. If you were an investor and you kind of looked at it and you think, it's a great idea, love it. Do you want to invest? Not sure. Hold on. Let me see if it works first, right? So in the background, what we've had to do to come up and kind of negate a lot of the de-risking part from some of these is kind of look at that customer adoption. Think, how do we get from where we are now to making sure that people are going to think, yeah, this is, you're educating me, I want to do it. But let's say if they're with a Monzo, a Revolut, Starling Bank, whoever it is, Tide, and so a challenger bank, they're happy. And you say to them, I'm going to introduce this to you. It's Manchester Pay, London Pay, Birmingham Pay, whatever it is. And they say, oh, it's great. Yeah, I'll use it. Thanks very much. And never do, right? How do you get them to kind of transfer over, kind of, because they love what they have, right? The kind of, I can split fees, I can do this, and kind of happy with my bank. My wages are going in. So in the background, we decided to go back to the original, what we had talked about previously, this kind of local e-commerce platform. We didn't leave that and think, that's it, that's dead, close that down. What we've done is now we're trying to rethink about putting this as a marketplace into a banking system and kind of rethink about how you open up your banking app or account and so on and look at things, because usually we do it to pay, to set up a direct debit. How much money have I got is usually the biggest one. Yeah, okay, I have enough. I'll go out for a drink tonight. Fine. And pay bills, right? And that's all you're doing. So it's only a means to an end. So what if we kind of rejig that a little bit? So the first thing we needed to do is build some SaaS products, build on to what we had built previously on that e-commerce bit. Now, this all intertwines because the best example I can give you is restaurateur here in Bristol, a friend of mine. And he said, Christian, I've loads of different restaurants, different things that I do. I've one that I'm just opening. He says, gastropub, but also has some rooms in it. I have a lovely Michelin star place. I have a fish and chip shop. I've also got, another nice pub somewhere else. I've got this, I've got that. Oh, by the way, I do some classes sometimes, for people that want to do it. We also do experiences. And weddings. You forgot about the weddings. Yeah, we do that sometimes. And some barbecue and different parties. And I went, okay, so actually, as a restaurateur, it's no longer just that one thing, is it? It's no longer just come here, book through whatever booking system you have and sit down and eat, and then that's it. And you went, oh God, no. He says, I have multiple different software tools that all the staff have to log into different ones, whether in the back end or in the front end. He said, so we have to log into different ones. Then on top of that, I have different subscription services depending on where they are. Then on top of that, I have different transaction fees depending on which software I have. And he said, so it's a nightmare for, accounting and so on. Wouldn't it be great if we had just one platform? I went, yeah, actually, that's again, what we're doing is we have a problem. The
Mm.
simplest solution to go from A to B here is we build a one platform. Yeah. Well, yeah, but it's far too expensive. I said, well, hold on, we've got this. Let's build on that. So that's what we've been doing in the background. So we've been testing now for about a year, and we're building an all-in-one platform, one login, one password, etc. You get in there, one transaction fee. You never need to go anywhere else. It's just tab, 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 and they all interlink, and it's all automated, right? So you do
Mm.
classes, experience, you decide what you have. It becomes modular. You kind of add things as you need to, or take it away. There's no kind of you're tied in for kind of next year or so on. And many of these other, I suppose, competitors, let's say unnamed, will kind of want to tie you in for a long time with a great deal because the deal is so good they need to tie you in for such a long time. I don't think people necessarily in businesses want that. Businesses are always the ones, James, I think are the ones kind of sorry for being crude, are bending over a little bit. It's never so
Mm.
much us, because we're the ones kind of going, well, it's transactional. I'd like this. Seems to be the price that I want. Give it to me. Done. There's your money, right? We go away. We
Mhm.
don't think about what happens afterwards with the money and all the stresses that a lot of these businesses are having to put up with, and the costs and so on. So transitioning by building something like this platform and putting it in and integrating it into restaurateurs and so on and different businesses. Essentially, what we'll have then is a commercially engaged audience already ready to go when we
Mm.
switch on our Bristol Pay for here or London Pay or Paris Pay, whatever it is, and hitting then at the heartstrings, saying, hey, by the way, this won't take very, very long. But if you pay this way, double tap and it'll come up Bristol Pay rather than Apple Pay or whatever, or through Apple Pay, whichever way, whichever direction we go, what's going to happen is the local area that you're in is going to get the money quicker. They're going to get more of it. And your money that you're putting in will actually be reinvested. A partial part of that, 0.25% of that, will be reinvested as a positive social impact into that local community. And don't worry if you don't live there, because people that are visiting and so on will also be paying into that local community, etc. So no matter where you are, the money is now staying in that local area. And
Mm.
that's our goal. That's the aim. That's where we're at the moment. And we're at a journey now of raising more funds to go out and get this next part of it done. And launching all these products. But I think all of the stories I'm telling you here today are those ones, James, in particular, of those transitioning, learning, and then coming up with a very simple solution to a problem and to grassroots problems, and
Mm.
actually simplifying it to the degree of it doesn't need to be complicated. Now, there's complications afterwards. The kind of, when we talk about the city pot, well, how do you manage that? That's going to be through a blockchain, right? In terms of how you distribute that and look at where things are going, and then others will look at kind of, okay, I get that, but the automation part, well, that's AI, okay, but that's at a later stage. Come up with a solution first. I think in terms of understanding really what you can get back, and someone thinks about it's pennies. This, you're not going to make loads of money. There's going to be how much money is really lost in the city. Well, the greatest example is Bristol that we're talking about right here. £80 million leaves the city every year in those small kind of like a tax in the city, those small little transaction fees, those pennies. 80 million. Now, if you can keep 10%, 1% in the city,
Crazy.
that's what you can do. And you think about councils and charities and so on. Everyone, there's organizations throughout the whole UK, through Europe, world, kind of always have their hand out, right? And they have to say, look, can you help the local area? Or I'm looking for a grant or for money. Well, there's a solution here of how we can organically develop and actually create that local wealth and that money into our own local community, into our own economy, and that ecosystem can be built and built really easily to support these kind of these areas, and support obviously the issues that come with it, and actually really, really possibly deal with it that are not being dealt with in these days.
No, it's a really powerful message, and yeah, I can imagine there's a lot of small business owners are mostly, from my experience, are against the big big banks and bigger authorities to get that they want local, they want community. It's a big thing. It's a really powerful message.
Yeah, it's the most unserviced as well when you think about it. You think about the transactions these days, and when you're signing up and you're getting, one of these terminals and so on, whether you're retail or hospitality business or any kind of business, you'll notice that they're all different, right? And you kind of have ones that are kind of, this shape and they're black and kind of, you put in the details, etc. And you kind of think, not naming names, so I was trying to think about it. And you think, why is that different than if I go into a small or an independent and they have a little kind of a small little white box or something, or, a little kind of neat one? You think, well, actually, they're set up directly for that. The more transactions you do, the more money that you put through, the lower rate that you get, right? So if you're starting off for the very first time, it's just, everything is against you, is what I'm trying to say. You start your business off with, how much is this going to cost me? Well, you're at this rate. Why? Well, we don't know how much you're going to do. You tell us how much you're going to do. I'm going to do 2 million. Okay, how much you're really going to do? Well, probably 20 grand or else. But I have to say 2 million, because actually, if I don't say that, and then by the end of it, they go, you didn't quite do that, so we have to charge you more. And so everything is against, and that's not just transactions. When you look at everything else, it's kind of the more you spend, the less you kind of that we're going to charge, etc. And sometimes I do feel like it should be almost the other way around. When you're making money and you kind of look at it in terms of percentage of what your outgoings are as a business and you're operating, you don't really feel that hit as much. You kind of go, well, that's what it is. You don't want to pay that amount of money and so on, but you don't hit it as much. When you're a small business, a pop-up, a startup, independent and so on, every penny counts. And I think it's, kind of these freemium accounts and kind of so on. Yeah, great at the start, but then it's kind of like, you bought the car. We didn't realize you want the wheels as well. Of course I do. I can't go. I just have this, So it's trying to support them, not just in that local area, but in terms of everything else. And that's why it's taken from where it is. Yeah.
Yeah. When it comes to growth right now, what's the big challenge, that you're facing, or what's maybe not working the level that could or should?
I suppose it's tech affordability without losing that human element. Uh, Being able to take what we have now and scale that quite quickly, and looking at where the industry is going. And I suppose when you look at the larger companies, your competitors, let's say in a SaaS market, and they are just turning out new features and so on. And by the time you're getting to that stage, they turn on something else and you're trying to catch up all the time. We'll take that example of the hospitality industry. And if you have one customer, they'll say, could you do this for me? Yeah, no worries. And once you do it for one, it's done for everyone, so to speak, because it's part of the platform. That's what they want you to do, because that's what their needs are right now. When you've got 100 customers, all their needs are slightly different. We need this now. We need this now. So you try and kind of do a little bit of everything. And that's the biggest challenge, is actually looking at it and thinking, what's the most important thing? What do I need to do now that's going to get out, that actually standardization that we can do either really, really well and leave something to say, sorry, we don't have that feature, or you do everything and you kind of go, we have it, but it's just not as good as everyone else's at the moment. So that kind of affordable and tech, and the scalability of that tech in a quick format, is probably the biggest challenge right now, to be able to do that without real kind of proper investment, when you have that.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. What's the goal over the next sort of 6 to 12 months when it comes to growth then?
I think I think what we need to do first of all is get properly launched in terms of the rest of the SaaS elements that we have, that one platform. That's the aim. So we're hoping
Mm.
that by early July, definitely that's what's on the whiteboard, at least from the team. Early July, this platform gets its proper launch. So that's kind of the automated launch. So it's out there, it's being used already, but properly, that scalability where someone sees it on TikTok, on Instagram, and so on, and kind of clicks and says, "Oh yeah, okay, that I could use that." Don't tie them in. Make sure it works for them. Make sure it's modular, that they can add things as they go along, but sticky enough that actually, we keep them there. I think that's the aim over the next kind of couple of months. After that, then it's growing enough revenue that when that comes back in, to be able to say, right, that scalability, that affordable tech piece, we can put people together, building a proper customer service kind of element to it, because that's one thing that I think frustrates people more than anything else, right? Something's gone wrong. Who do I get in touch with? Right now, at the very start of what we're doing, they were able to WhatsApp us, give us a call and so on. Oh, hi, John, how are you? Yeah, 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 no problem. We fix that. It's the best customer service they'll ever get, right? But
Mm.
at a later stage, you kind of go, we can't always do this. We have to look at different stages along the way. So that's why, now bringing in an architect, bringing in some really good people, people that actually can support what we are doing, has been key, and we've done that. And I think, over those next kind of couple of months, then bring in that revenue where we can kind of go, right, that's what we need to do. But then looking again at our fintech piece, which is actually what we are wanting to get, that is the end goal, and kind of thinking, where do we need to be? So our aim is to kind of, before the start of 2026, to get the rest of the, next 6 months out, before the start of 2026, is get this launched, get Bristol Payji launched in Bristol, this Bristol Pay element, and kind of have that, because the payment side of what we have now, we have all we have all those add-ons, right? You can get your terminal, you can do your payments, we can reduce the costs, we've done all that. That's fine. But actually, what it doesn't give us is the elements that we want to be able to reinvest that back into the local community again, as part of that positive social impact that I talked about. And that's the aim. That has to be where it is. So I think there is that kind of 18-month kind of plan. I think
Mm.
as part of that, naturally now comes the area of, we've spent a lot of money over the last kind of couple of years. Now is the time to get investment. And I think that's key to us. But getting the right investors, we've had a couple of offers so far for a lot of money. Um, the deals haven't been quite right. And it's not necessarily due to kind of any greed or anything like that, but it just in terms of, let's say, what those end goals are. Where do we really want to be in kind of 5 years' time? And of course, from an investment point of view, think, yeah, well, someone will come in and probably buy us. This looks like a good proposition. But making sure that you're very much aligned with those prospective investors is absolutely key. You have to have the same goal, you have to have the same mindset, you have to have the same kind of outlook in terms of what it is you're actually trying to build. If you have someone that says, "What's my ROI?" is the first kind of question they ask, you go, well, I don't know if this person's going to be right or not, because they're only interested in that return. I get it. It's their money. They need to, but you kind of have to look at it logically in terms of, this will be $1 billion business in X, but we need to do these bits right first. We've already done our market analysis on this. We know where it is. We've done our market analysis on this bit. Doesn't mean that it's right, but it means that we're going in the right direction. And you asked about kind of challenges. We'll have to pivot so many times in the next kind of 5 years. Code will change, updating stuff, making sure that, the different trends, and kind of going, oh my God, we need to do this, looking at different markets abroad, and kind of going, this could go in to this country here, or so on. How can we support this area? And I think those are the key bits, but they're also the fun bits as well, right? There's stress comes along with that, but naturally it's part of those bits where you're kind of going, oh God, we're making a real change here. But actually, change will really come when you start to develop those solutions, and actually it takes on and starts sticking. And then you go, that's
Mm,
when the money eventually comes. Not at that start where you can go, I can do this, but later. Like, yeah.
mm. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And you're rolling out in Bristol, and that's going to be sort of your foundational case study, right? Because you mentioned, other communities are going to be like, it sounds great in concept, but I need proof that maybe this is going to work. So rolling out in your local, getting that use case,
Yeah.
then you can take that on to expansion.
Yeah, I think there's certain kind of other elements to that, and to why kind of your audience. I live in Bristol. I've been here now 20 years, despite my accent. Being from Ireland. I've been here for a long time. We have started the build and gone through this phase of doing everything here in Bristol. It's a great setup for the fintech industry. The Department for Business and Trade were here for FinTech Week a couple of weeks ago down at SS Great Britain. I did a talk there. And some things I was learning while I was there is the Southwest especially is such a massive hub for both AI and fintech. I think the university now is the number one university for AI, and it's really it's a great place for talent as well. And I think just setting it up here has all these things going for us. But that's not only reason to kind of just do what we're doing only in Bristol now. We'll be spinning at a few other plates at the same time and looking where to go next and how to implement it. But I think it needs to work, as you said. And then we need to get it to a stage where that with that investment, where it is all our proprietary technology. And actually it becomes a plug and play. So if it works here, that plug and play then can go anywhere. So you have a centralized cost then for one area, but actually the costs then are reduced, and certainly the customer adoption cost is reduced. So unlike a lot of the other digital banks, you're looking at kind of, 60 to 80 pounds, to onboard one person. Let's say bank says you've switched and they go, great. That's what it's kind of cost them to onboard you, but we don't even know if you're using it. You're on board. It doesn't mean you're putting money in and actually using it. You've signed up. So it's a large cost for customer adoption kind of thing. So we need to make sure this part is right and actually people do it. There's one other element as part of that. When Bristol Pound was here in the city, one of the things that the council were looking to do is actually you would pay your council tax, right? You pay your council tax with it. And the mayor at the time, George Ferguson, he was taking his salary with it, and he just wanted to lead and show actually this is the right thing, and I want to kind of lead by example here. And actually, we could really put a lot of money back into our local area. And I think when you look at this and you kind of think, actually, how much customer adoption could you get? Well, if a council came to us and said, actually, we're using this outside, acquire, our MSP, etc., and we are bringing money, or sorry, the transactions are going through here, but it's very low because we're doing so much in council tax. It's very low. We're only paying 0.3, 0.4%. Could we look at Bristol Pay? Could we do it? Yeah, absolutely. How much could you do it for? Well, because obviously we had no acquiring piece, we can do it at zero. Now we wouldn't do it at zero because we're not going to make any money, and we can't, reinvest any money back into the natural communities. But you look at it and you say you'll match that as an example, because of the amount of money going into a pot like that, because it is council tax. One, you have 100% adoption. The second thing is you have money naturally then coming straight in and being reinvested then back into those little communities. And you could do that by postcodes, right? So Bristol has 34, I think, postcodes, something like that. So you could break that up and actually go, money goes in there, and then you could get local kind of, I suppose, community groups or so on to come together and say, hey, by the way, what is it that you're looking to do in the local area that you haven't been able to do, haven't been able to raise money? It's these things. Okay. And then for everyone using it, you could ping them and say, what would you like to do? Have a vote. Now it becomes a people powered payments platform, and you kind of, people get to actually have a vote on how the money is being spent in your local area, because they've been reinvested. They're investing in it. Um, and I think that's naturally forms part of that plug and play then to say, it's worked. Look at what we've done, not just because we set it up and people are using it, but look at what we've been able to do for the local areas. It's not come from us. This has come from the people themselves. Look at the stories here of how they were able to regenerate lost areas, re-engage with local lost communities and so on, different areas, etc. And it becomes quite diverse in how it can adapt as well, because they're getting a say in their local area, no matter how different it is to from area A to area B. And I think that's when it will show its true colors. And then you'll have an influx, we hope, of people kind of going, or councils, or whatever it is, saying, this is great. How do we take this on board? How do we give this to the people of our area?
Mm. Yeah, really, really interesting. What are you most excited about right now? What excites you most?
I think right now the movement from, I suppose, our shift from global first to community first. When you look at obviously
Mm,
the issues and problems going on these days, I think that excites me in terms of the where we are going, both as a society and so on. Now, look,
mm,
there's a lot of bad things going on, and a lot of negativity. But I think through that, you start to see different trends appearing. You start to see different
mm,
opportunities, and I think there's a lot of good happening as well. We forget that sometimes. You kind of really have to delve into that and kind of see where we're going as a society, etc. And I get the big kind of headlines and so on, and people being disgruntled by X, Y, and Z. But I think when we're looking to do something like this, it's kind of solving a lot of these little problems that we kind of haven't, we said, oh, we can't deal with anything like this. We always have to deal with it. It's always the government's fault, or it's always this, or it's always that. And I think what excites me is being able to solve a problem that's always been there, that kind of grassroots problem, and actually come back in and being able to do something good. That's the bit that excites me more than anything else. Um, if trying to grow something like that will have huge amounts of challenges. I've no
mm.
idea the next time we speak where I'm going to be, how it's going to look, the pivoting I talked to you about, and so on, or what it looks like. But that's an exciting part. So yeah, I look forward to it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I'm right there with you. I think there's a huge that global shift, societal shift from global to community. I think it's there. I think it shows up and expresses itself in a whole bunch of different ways. And you being on that shift in the fintech financial space for sure, that's a big, it's a big thing. And yeah, you definitely got your work cut out, but I'll be watching your growth with great interest, because yeah.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. I'll be hopefully, yeah, absolutely. It goes quite well. But as I say, you never know. If 5 years ago we were doing this, the conversation probably would have been a little bit different. But this is where your internal growth comes as well, in terms of your
Mm,
learning, and hence the start of the conversation. Kind of, what's his expertise in fintech?
mm,
Have one. I didn't have one, kind of prior to kind of five years ago. And now you kind of come through this story, this kind of, journey, and you kind of think, what's your expertise now? Well, I've seen, talked, researched, done this, etc. Now I'm doing talks, to Department of Business Trade about these kind of things. And what they're really wanting to know is really, what are those trends? What are you seeing that no one else is seeing? And
mm,
so yeah, we'll
mm,
look at this journey with hope more than anything else,
mm,
even though hope has never been a strategy, but you have to
mm.
have some.
Yeah, well, it's that entrepreneurial mindset. You've got to, you're taking on a challenge, you're fully embracing the battle, but you've got to remain optimistic about, the outcomes on that journey. So,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I suppose the convergence of mission and the tech in particular is one to look out for.
Amazing. Well, Christian, I really appreciate this conversation. It's very insightful. You sharing your journey and some wisdom along the way, and all those insights you've shared. I really appreciate it. Where can people find out more about you online?
I think the easiest thing when people listen to this is they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty good actually at returning messages. I say that now until it blows up, and it kind of, there's so many so many. But I'm always happy if people are in Bristol to meet for coffee. I'm always happy to kind of speak to people when I have time. And I know kind of time is one of those kind of constructs where you kind of think about, well, we've so much to kind of get done. But I think, you know, people with those kind of ideas that want to make a change will naturally get in touch, and they're more than happy to. And I think I've never been one to pretend that I have all the answers, and you never will. And I think it's kind of listening to others and see what they have to say. You take that on board. So I think LinkedIn is the best way. And of course, you can give my details as well. I'm happy for people to reach out on email as well.
Yeah, really appreciate this conversation, and I'll be watching the growth of Payji with great interest.
Thanks, James. Really appreciate it. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
No worries. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.